Welcome, everybody, to the American Space Museum. I'm Marquette. We're so glad you're with us to stay curious. You see, I got beside me one of our popular guests, Gary Allgire. Welcome, Gary.
Thank you for having me back.
Well, thank you for coming back. He's a snowbird. You've been up in northeast Georgia.
Up in the mountains of North Georgia.
Well,
East,
I
yeah.
I'm jealous of that because I'd like to get on a mountain with a telescope and not look through thick haze here
Yeah.
on the Florida coast. But it's got its advantages, obviously, and one of them is working at the American Space Museum and getting to know great guys like Gary, who's been an awesome contributor to our program. Uh, as we've told you, Gary's a structural engineer with NASA. He worked. When did you start working?
I started in January 1968.
So that would have been after Gemini, of course. So that's right at the
Well,
beginning of the Apollo
it
era.
was Apollo 6 was the very first launch that was part of.
Okay.
Okay, we did Apollo 4, and then Apollo 5, which came after 6, was they used an S4B, not a Saturn 1B, to launch the first lunar module into orbit unmanned.
There you go. Gary's done some great programs on the Saturn, the sixth mission of Saturn V. That was incredible with all the anomalies that the next Saturn V put America around the moon. That's a great program. He did a program on the Buran, the Russian uh, space shuttle, and the most popular one is your Apollo 1 program,
Wow.
Gary. That is just awesome. Go back and put his name in our YouTube archives, and that Apollo 1, you're going to learn things uh, in not a in a very respectful way. We've always portrayed the tragedies in a respectful way, and what you bring as a structural engineer just tells us some pieces and parts things that when you see photographs, they'll mean so much more to you. I'll never look at the three pictures of the guys in the spacecraft and not look at that pouch behind Ed
Yeah.
White's head that he was supposed to get the tool out to open the
the
door,
hatch, yeah.
open the hatch. But Gary, thank you so much for jumping in here today. We threw together some space events going on. We got that for him to talk about, including the your opinion on the Boeing Starliner docked up
Yeah.
there. Behind us is the Cygnus uh, spacecraft by Northrop Grumman that brought up about how many tons of supplies? I
Quite a
think
bit.
about 4,000 pounds or more of supplies. I errantly got excited that it was had a thruster problem getting to the space station and should not have posted that today on Facebook because it docked at about 3:30 this morning. This is not the picture of it, but they named it after Dick Scobie, the commander of the Challenger, and
I went.
launched on Sunday. We saw it go up Sunday. Did you see it
No,
Sunday?
I think I was recovering from the drive down. So
Oh,
I
okay.
missed it.
Well, it shot right between the clouds. You couldn't even believe it. They
Yeah.
were going to launch it.
Yeah.
With the
Oh,
disturbance in the
yeah.
Gulf and so forth. But they did, and now it's docked. And you bet that there's some special things inside for Butch Williams and Sonny.
They're
Butch
closed.
Wilmore and Sonny Williams is who's up there, and we're going to talk about that here in a few minutes. But we did want to, Gary. We wanted to
Okay.
Gary's going to talk about a potpourri of things. So if you've got questions for him, we've got Logan Cope on the board here to answer, to relay those questions to you. We hope you got a few questions for Gary. Uh, I'm sure you can't stump him on anything, but you can
I don't
try.
know. You might.
And I'm going to go to my YouTube channel here once I turn you loose. But we wanted to wish a happy birthday to Winston Scott. Winston is 74 years old today, and there he is appearing on Stay Curious. Winston, thank you for all that you do at the American Space Museum and the space community in general. He is the astronaut overall, the astronaut encounter program at Kennedy Space Center Visitors Complex, and I wished him a happy birthday this morning and just heard read an email from him that he's having a great day on his 74th birthday. He says they come in quick. The older I get, the quicker they're coming
That's true.
in there. So, and we had these three astronaut birthdays on Sunday. Of course, in the middle, Mike McCully turned 81, and Andy Allen on the right, and Sam Gemar turned 69 years old over the weekend. And he's a great friend of the museum. He is the CEO of Aerodyne Company, so he's very much involved still in the space community. And Sam Gemar's popular out at the Space Center, appearing 3 or 4 times a year, it seems, out there and telling you all about being an astronaut and so forth. So, Gary, you know any of these astronauts? Anything to do with them?
Well, Mike McCullough, we saw, I'm familiar with because he was in charge of Rockwell at one time down
Yeah.
here. And then the other two astronauts.
Well, he's beloved man, CEO, COO of United Space
the
Alliance
United
too.
States, yeah.
He was very
Alliance.
involved with, and then you're saying, sorry to interrupt you there.
But the other two, no, I don't know. If they were late shuttle, then I would not know who they were.
Trying to get to our YouTube channel here. Of course, a lot of us have seen the farcical, is the best way to put it.
Oh, gosh.
Fly Me to the Moon there. You took your bride to go see it.
Yes, I did. Oh, man, I don't know.
Did you ask for your money back?
There wasn't. I don't think there's anybody there to get money back from. There was
Really?
only us and one other couple in the show at the time. Of course, we saw it up in Blairsville, Georgia, and it was something.
Well, we got you all watching today, including Mitch Rothman of Manned Space. His Manned Space is a Facebook page, NASA Manned Space, very good one, Gary. Mitch does a lot what we do on ours. Revel in space history.
Okay.
Mark UCX saying good afternoon, guys. Hey, Mark. Dean Babcock, hello, and nice to see Gary back from one of our
Thank you.
intelligent viewers there. Doug Forrest, say hello to you, buddy. And Robert Law is watching in Dundee, Scotland, enjoying his 9 o'clock in the evening cocktail there. So chime in any questions that you have. We're going to talk a little bit about Apollo 11 and 15, what Gary knows about or what he was involved in or not involved in, so to speak. And also going to talk about the Boeing situation up there. But as far as this movie's concerned, it is entertaining, very far-fetched, very fast and loose with the facts.
Everything was wrong about that movie, Mark. I'm looking at it from a technical standpoint, and what we did and how we did it. And my concern was, I've told you before, 50 years from now, somebody pulls that off the shelf and shows it back on TV, and people really don't know anything. Will think that's how we actually tried to do it, and how we tried to fake it.
Yeah.
And that is so far fetched. It's a cartoon, basically. Is what it is.
Oh, yeah, it is a very far-fetched cartoon.
Yeah.
So, like he says, you hate that people pull this off and think that, oh, that's the way it is.
Yeah.
I talked to Gary a lot about Joe and Jane America out there in the heartland, have no interest like we do in the 2 or 3 rocket launches we have here every week. I'm going to go up to Tennessee for a vacation and wish my beautiful daughter, hey, Jessica, her birthday in a couple weekends, and no one in Tennessee is going to even care about a Falcon 9 rocket.
Well, that's true.
But it touches all their lives.
That's right.
They should care in some way
Should care
about what's going on up there.
I will say this about the movie. It's a caution. Do not try any of that stuff out there at the Space Center that you saw on that TV. You will find yourself in jail real quick.
That's right. Exactly. Logan's going to give a question that we have for Gary right out of the chute.
From Mark Usiak, did they ever test eject crash test dummies out of a vertical Gemini's simulated capsule after being soaked in pure oxygen for a couple hours to see the results?
No, that's what I'm aware of, and I know that Stafford was very concerned about that ejecting from the Gemini capsule, and he has told people that if they had to eject during his mission, what they would see was 2 roving candles come out instead of the 2 astronauts. And the reason he says that because they have been sitting in that cockpit for 4 or 5 hours, soaking up the oxygen. It's in their clothes. And that rocket motor that's sitting underneath the rear end when it light off, it would light off. It would also become, it would burn. And part to emphasize this, when I was in the Navy, they showed us a film of a Navy personnel that was working on the oxygen system of a fighter jet, and his clothes were soaked in it. He didn't know it, and he lit a cigarette, and he completely went up in flames. Unfortunately, they showed us the picture of him laying on a slab of in a hospital someplace right as he was dying.
Oh my gosh.
Just to make the fit, to give you the emphasis of you got to be very careful around oxygen. Most people think oxygen will explode and burn. It's not. It supplies the oxygen for the flame, which increases it. That's why it's so dangerous. So if you're a smoker and you're on oxygen, that is a bad combination.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're talking about the Gemini program had 2 ejection seats for the
Yes.
astronauts, which is about going to do as much good as the 2 ejection seats in the 4 shuttle.
Max
first 4
Fouget,
shuttles.
this was Max Fouget's idea, who designed the Gemini spacecraft and the Mercury spacecraft. He did not like to launch escape towers. He felt that was extra weight that's not needed, that he can do it better.
Okay.
And what he did is he studied all the rocket explosions at that time. And what he noticed is the fireball. They said on a Titan missile, they used hypergolics for a fuel. That ball that was generated as exploded on the pad was not as big as one that was using liquid oxygen and RP-1. So he figured ejection seat would get the astronauts far enough away that they wouldn't be in that fireball. So that's why he went to the ejection seats. Astronauts hated it. They really did.
Did they ever lobby for an escape tower on Gemini?
No, I don't think they had the time and the power to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But that's what he wanted. They also didn't like the ejection seats because they had to do a weight and balance of them before they would get into the seat to be put into the cockpit. I mean, the seat was already put in there, but prior to putting it in, they had to get all suited up and sit there laying there for hours while the techs did a weight and balance on that whole combination. And they just did not like sitting there for like that.
Well, I never thought about that as something you'd have to be
Yeah.
concerned with, the
Yeah.
right balance to get you
Yes.
ejected out of there. Well, thank you for that question there, Mark Usiak. Mitchell, the man space commenter here, he says, and I don't know if they got flight director Jerry Griffin was a technical advisor on this film.
Oh my. Okay.
Yeah, I
I should
hope
know better.
he should know better, is right. He probably had an eraser there that went
Yeah.
there. Well, before we get too far into space history, we want to mourn the loss of Bob Giffen. Bob lost his life over the weekend. I talked to his daughter, Debbie, this morning. I've been making calls to Bob to tell him about 2 of our other old timers that have passed away, Murphy Wardman and Jack Martin, and we celebrated their life last week. And so we celebrate a little bit of Bob Giffen's life here. What a great guy, a good docent, just like you, always willing to talk about in detail, and people ate it up. There he is at the Neil Armstrong handprints a few years ago. And Bob did a very unique thing that no other human being did during the Apollo era. He hung off the side of the second stage. He was a North American guy, so North American was responsible for the Saturn V. There was some sort of insulation that they wanted to put in. I forget the details of why that insulation was needed in there. And they were going to either roll the Saturn V back to the VAB is the only way to do it. And Bob said, I can hang off the side of it and do it.
Oh my.
And there he is. He got a Ripley's award for the highest insulation job ever by a person.
I think, unfortunately, there's another person that beat that.
Oh, do you?
Yeah, it was on Skylab.
Oh, yeah, right.
Skylab, on the original launching of the lab itself, at the very top of the nose cone is called a cue ball.
Yes.
And it had a cover over it. And so normally the cue ball is hooked to a lanyard, hooked to that overhead crane that you see there, and it takes it off. they couldn't do that. So what they ended up doing, they've asked for volunteers to get into the harness, and they would use that crane. And right before the launch, they would go out there and hang over there and pull that thing off.
Holy cow!
I would have loved to have volunteered, but they already had somebody selected. But that was done like a day or so before launch. But that's what they had to do.
Cue ball was the guidance system at the very tip of the...
It gives them the inclination as they launched, and it tells the crew in the Apollo spacecraft if they're on track to go into orbit. If it comes off that's either way on that track, then they have to do an abort.
Well, there's Bob hanging off the side of the Saturn V rocket, and he really was a cool guy. He I got to know him very well, and I'm going to miss him a lot. And he gave some great, there he is giving a docent talk, and by golly, there's Dave Stange and his wife Julie there listening. So, Dave, I'm sure you remember Bob giving you this talk, this docent tour. I used it many times, this picture, to talk about our docent tours here. And you just like when Gary gives you a tour, you're going to get the works, okay?
Yeah.
It's not driving in and getting the $8 car wash, okay? You're going to get the whole $25 car wash there.
You're going to get a good
with
tour.
you guys there. That's right. But God bless you, Bob, and we miss you a lot already, and we miss all of our national treasures. That's what you are, Gary, and that's what we consider Bob and the others national treasures, truly, because they did things that no other people have repeated in such a way, like going to the moon 6 times, 6 successful landings. So we may talk more about Bob in the future here, but one of the greats here at the museum, that what we're all about is you space workers. So rest in peace. So there I have a final picture of him being interviewed by the ARD, German public radio station. That may not be, it's one of the radio stations there. And there he is being interviewed. Right above him is an insulation block that he put together that showed how the insulation in that Saturn V rocket was. Why the insulation was important? Because that Saturn V rocket was fueled with, 280 below zero.
270, I think, is for the hydrogen and oxygen somewhere in there. It's a little bit different between the two, but there's
the insulation was like a thermos to keep it cold in there. So God bless you, Bob. I'll be posting something on Facebook about you this afternoon today. So something in space history to talk about, Gary, is, and you got Gary's name up there, Logan? Yeah, there you go. No one remembers the first person, ever remembers the first person to do something, but you hardly ever remember the second person to do something. And this is the second launch of a human being to orbit the Earth, happened today in 1961, and that was Germain Titov. And there he was. He spent a full day in space, 17 revolutions, where in April 12th of 1961, Yuri Gagarin actually only did 7/8 of a revolution, where Kazakhstan was, where he launched and where he landed. I
thought he did a complete orbit.
Not quite.
Not quite? Okay.
Because they landed separate from the spacecraft, but that didn't... I still think he did 7/8 of an orbit. Very interesting astronaut. His only flight to space, Titov. He was a world-class gymnast, athlete, one of the most fit of all the cosmonauts. He also liked to party a lot. He was pretty wild and had some car wrecks and some drinking situations that fell in disfavor with Korolev, the great designer, and the astronaut corps, and that may have contributed to him never flying again. He was, Martin Caden wrote his biography called I Am Eagle. That was his call sign as he floated around the world. He did control the spacecraft, they say, a little bit. But he also was very angry and bitter that he wasn't the first cosmonaut, okay? And the reason why was Gagarin wasn't as fit as he was. And they wanted the second flight to be a full day in space, and they said, he's not physically fit like Titov to do this. was one thing.
I think personality-wise, and maybe that would have something to do with it.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Here is a Vostok spacecraft orbiting Earth. The first 6 look similar to this. The cosmonauts in the bulbous structure there. The avionics and life support systems are in the back. This is an artist rendition.
This is a rendition, but I'm not sure that that is an actual one that he flew in. It's
Yeah.
similar. It's because they don't have all the antennas on it for the communication that would be hanging off of
Right.
the cylinder and also off the back.
Yeah, that was a last minute grab for me, and
Yes,
maybe the
yeah.
wrong image.
There's
to
quite a
put up
few.
there.
They use that thing. I think they still may be using that system. The Russians used it for a lot of different things. A lot of spy satellite stuff with it. A lot of experiments were used on those vehicles. So there's a ton of different configurations.
But you, as a structural engineer, Gary, everything pretty much looks the same. This evolved into the Soyuz spacecraft, which was 3 parts, that 40 years later, though they've upgraded it on there, they still using it. The launch rocket still looks the same that we showed here. So what is it with Russia? If it's made good enough, they're not going to improve it?
That's part of their philosophy. In fact, we had some Russian kids come through here, teenagers. Well, not teenagers. They were young men. They were in their 20s. And we talked about that a little bit, about our technologies versus theirs. And they were impressed because we're going into more using computers and stuff like that. Whereas what their philosophy was, if it works, keep using it.
Yeah.
Until it breaks, well, that's what we're going to be using. And that's what they've been doing. We call it crude, but it works. It's simple, and they can manufacture them right now pretty cheap compared to what a new vehicle would cost.
We're talking the Soyuz spacecraft. There's
Yeah.
one of them docked to the International Space Station right now, MS-25. I always wondered why NASA didn't want to keep the tried and true Apollo command module as a quick access to space, a rescue vehicle, or even because now the Boeing Starliner, the NASA Orion look exactly like the Apollo command module.
It has a lot to do with Congress. When we ended up and never said we've already been to the moon, yes, we did that and we've been there and done that attitude. And there was no reason to go back. They didn't see, there was no gold, there was no oil or anything that was worth mining for. So everybody lost interest. The news people actually had a lot to do with this, but they were always talking about how this money is being wasted. We could use it for this and use it for that. So there was no emphasis to keep the Apollo spacecraft around. And then we got into the shuttle, and that's what everything became. That's it. We're going to go fly the shuttle. It's going to take care of everything. We won't have any other, we called candlesticks. They'll be launching satellites, and we'll all do that with this shuttle. And so that emphasis took away anything that we would even do with the Apollo spacecraft.
Yes, that's interesting that NASA was so arrogant in 1972 when the contracts were awarded for the shuttle, that they said, forget your single stick rockets.
Well,
Everybody's
everybody,
going to
I mean,
launch
that was a big thing across the whole nation. Hey, we've made it to the moon. Now we can put this plane in there and do all this stuff. And I looked at it as an airplane. Airplanes fail. You look back at the 50s and the 60s and all the plane crashes that we had. They were more common and prevalent back then than they are today. And so I looked at it, and we studied that way. It says, hey, this is an airplane basically, and at the time we figured that there was one in every 55 flights we would have an accident. Back in the early days.
We're going to get to Dean Babcock's question here in a minute there. He's got a very interesting one talking about Starliner, and that's the wheelhouse of what we wanted to get to with Gary today. Let me get a little more space history chewed off here as we're unbeknown. A lot of people don't know that the first 6 cosmonauts to go to space, including the first woman on Vostok 6, ejected out of their spacecraft All right, about 50,000 feet. This is why Valentina Tereshkova was chosen, because she was an expert parachutist. So they were ejected out in a MiG-style ejection seat. I've seen this in the Cosmosphere. It's pretty cool. They
Yeah.
got
Oh,
an
okay,
actual
cool.
display there it's set up that it's ejecting out of the side. And the spacecraft landed separately, and the cosmonaut landed on his own 2 feet, which brought for some funny stories when the Gagarin, supposedly in
Yeah,
his
when he
orange
walked.
suit, was met by a farmer that had a shotgun and saying, "Who in the hell are you?"
Yeah.
And he
He
says, "I'm
started,
from space, but I'm a
I'm a
Russian."
Russian. Yeah, he did that.
But they hid this, except it was in Titov's book, but it wasn't translated from Russian right away. I don't know how much.
Well, what happened is it actually, by the international rules at the time that was established,
Yes.
you couldn't say somebody orbited the Earth if they didn't. They had to launch in the capsule and they had to land in the capsule.
Yeah.
That was the requirement. So the Russians kept quiet. It was 40 years before they ever told anybody that, hey, we actually landed by parachute, which would have disqualified Valentina and it would have and Gagarin because they were not be the first persons that did this.
Yeah,
Because
all
of
of
that.
them would have been
Yeah,
it
disqualified.
wasn't a true leaving the Earth in the same spacecraft you came back in. So that makes John Glenn the first true spaceman
Yes, yeah, orbit the Earth. Yes.
orbit and
Yeah.
return in the same spaceship.
The
So,
same thing with the X-15s. They couldn't, even though it was the fastest thing that ever flew at the time, they couldn't consider it an airplane because it took off hanging from a bomber and it didn't take off on its own.
oh, okay.
So that was why they could never classify that as a true record breaker.
All right, there you go. The X-15 program that was so important to the materials and so forth
Oh, it
being
was
tested.
a fabulous program.
Is what?
It was a fabulous program.
Yeah.
It really was.
Yeah, it really was. I probably we ought to do a show on X-15 on there.
Yeah.
Of course, Neil Armstrong was one of the pilots. It's a big part of the
Yeah.
movie First Man that I love. He's doing a flight
Yeah.
on that. Actually, didn't do a very good flight according to that movie there on
I
there.
don't know
So.
about that.
Well, we're talking anything else about the cosmonauts? You know, it was a
No.
lot of propaganda. Gary and I are baby boomers. You can't believe the BS that Russia wanted to feed the world to just tout their supremacy.
Well, they bragged, and we didn't have the insight to know if they were telling us the truth or not until much, much later. After we finally had the Apollo-Soyuz test project was the breakdown of when we actually started communicating back and forth on a more friendly atmosphere. And
Yeah, the 1975 changed it all. The
changed it all.
Apollo-Soyuz
Yeah,
test
very,
project.
very. People don't realize how important that was. And eventually I'll talk about that, how it almost was a failure, total, complete failure.
Oh, really?
Yes. All because of one man. One man down here at Kennedy Space Center saved that program.
Well, maybe we'll talk about that next week with you if you got
Okay.
time to come back in here and do a show, because this is July was the month for
Okay.
the ATSP project. We just lost the general Tom Stafford, so important to that. Alexei Leonov, his Russian counterpart.
I gave him a tour, Lexi Leonov.
Oh, you gave Alexei Leonov a
Yeah,
tour?
Yeah, both him and his partner. Yes.
A tour of Kennedy Space
A
Center?
tour of when he came down. They came down, and then we had to. We was outside the chamber at the time with the docking system there. They asked it, and
Yeah.
so I was responsible. I was told to go down there, and between the interpreter and myself, I have a photograph of this that I gave him the tour of the docking system.
Okay. Did you need a translator for the
They were-
Oklahomski that he talked?
No, he was very, very gracious, and he spoke very good English. I mean, he didn't need an interpreter, but they had an interpreter. It was a female lady, and she stands behind me about over here when I did give him the tour.
made a joke because Tom Stafford from Oklahoma, they were
Yeah.
such great friends
Yeah.
that Leonov said, "I don't know American, I know Oklahomski." Okay, in there. But tell us, I mean, the first man to do that spacewalk, it was so dangerous. Man, he was so lucky to make it back alive.
I did not know that.
But
When I met him and gave him the tour, I did not know that he was the one that did that.
oh,
spacewalk.
really?
Yes, I did not.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So
So it was a surprise when I did find out. I said, "Oh man, that was that guy."
yeah, and he trained to be the first
Yeah.
Russian on the moon for sure.
Yeah, he would have been. Yeah.
He would have been.
Yeah.
And Well, he lived a long life into his 80s there. So,
Yeah.
all right, we're button up on that. That's how they landed.
Yeah.
Still a charred sphere is what they still
Can I
use.
say something about this ball?
Uh-huh.
Uh, no, that's the Soyuz one. I'll have to talk about the Soyuz.
Well, it's
When-
very similar.
Similar. Well, they used retro rockets to fire to slow the vehicle down just as it touched the ground.
Correct.
Okay. Now, to operate that, they had this devices in there that used radioactive material to sense when they were close to the ground. And so after they landed, I have seen videos of this from the guys. Some guys went over there to watch one of the landings. They took videos and they come back and they showed it to us. And they would do is they have these radiation signs on the side of it. And what they would do is they would sneak around the corner, and this guy would sneak around and put a plate over it. And then unspent ordnance, which was tubes about this long of solid rocket fuel propellant. They would slowly take those out. They'd go away a little ways. They'd dig a hole in the ground, and they would put that in the ground, and then they would run a match and leave and blow it up.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, it was crude, but that's how they did that kind of stuff over there.
We'll talk about a Soyuz later, because when the cosmonauts get out of their Soyuz spacecraft after being at the space station for 6 months, they can't walk out.
No.
They carry them out, put them in a lawn chair. They can maybe stand up an hour later. So 6 months of weightlessness does that to you, Gary.
Mm-hmm.
What's 9 months of weightlessness to Mars going to do? When you land on Mars, who's going to be there to get you out of the one-third gravity?
It's not quite like that. They'll be doing a lot of exercises to keep them in shape. Because today, even though they've been up there, sometimes they've been up there for a year, and they come out and they adapt quite well after because they spend hours,
Right, yeah, but
hours
then-
a day
Absolutely.
exercising.
But even 2 hours a day, they still have to pull them out, and
Yeah.
they can't.
Well, that's on the Russian side. Now, I'm
Yeah.
not going to say the American side. On the space station, they don't probably do that.
Right. Well,
Okay.
we don't see that behind
Yeah.
the scenes stuff there. Well, we talked about the Cygnus getting up there and docked, and we're so glad of that. This was the 21st, I think, resupply mission for Northrop Grumman. They had been launching out of Wallops Island, and their new, Antares rocket will be launching again out there, but they contracted SpaceX and Falcon 9. Like, I couldn't believe it that they launched it in the wind and the clouds.
I'm going to say, I was awake. I was out on my patio, which is enclosed. That was the loudest I've heard since the Saturn V, because of the way the cloud cover was at and the winds because of the storm. It shook our house. And then when it landed, I thought it had exploded.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was a big boom.
Oh, yeah.
Normally you get a kaboom. You get two kind of together,
Yeah.
but this was all solid one, and it really shook my house. I was really surprised.
Well, it was. I heard that boom big time there. So, all right. Well, let's see how we're gonna get
have a
to.
question?
Got some questions here. Thank you. We've got 12 human beings orbiting the Earth right now, Gary, and Dean Babcock says he'd really enjoy a show about the X-15. Tom Celentano, great that you're late but still there. And Will Whiting says hello to all of us and hugs to Karen, our executive director. And she's had a
Good for
chemo
her.
treatment today,
Yeah,
apparently.
we all
So
pray for her.
we're all praying
good lady,
for her.
Good lady.
Kay Gee says, thanks for doing this, y'all. Well, we've been doing it for over 1,000 episodes, Kay. Thanks for catching up with us, okay? And so, let's see. Dean Babcock's got a great question as we're talking about people in space right now. All three superpowers in space. Nobody else has been that way since July 22nd. And we've got 9 on the International Space Station, 3 on the Tiangong Space Station. Before we get to Starliner, what's your take on what the Chinese are doing? This is their 13th overall human space flight, and this is actually the 3rd space station they've occupied.
They got their act together. I'll have to say that. They do use the Russians' version of the Soyuz spacecraft to go up there, except they did something that I just found out about. This forge section, which is like a little cabin where they can go in there.
Uh-huh.
The Russians, when they re-entered, they just threw that away and let it come back and burn up in the atmosphere. The Chinese use it and they leave it in orbit, and it does stuff. It has instrumentation in it. It has
No way.
yeah,
I have
and
to look into
they
that.
have power to it. They have the solar panels on it, and they use it for experiments or do whatever they want to do. So they actually use it better than the Russians did.
Huh. You have it up there. Why not keep it
Yeah,
up there
keep
and
there.
do
Yeah.
some science or
Yeah.
spying?
Well,
Who
yeah,
who knows what they do?
Yeah, you never know.
Also in the news is some amateur astronomers took some photographs of the.
Oh yeah, the
uh,
spent stage from one of the Japanese launches.
no, the Chinese spy plane. It's equivalent to our
Oh, I haven't seen that. Oh, I'm
XB-37B.
thinking of a different one.
Our
then.
X-37B has an equivalent, a mini shuttle
Oh yeah,
that
yeah.
China's orbited now for the third time.
Okay.
And they can see some solar panels on it and some other stuff like that.
They're
on
good
it
at
there,
copying, let me tell you.
so let's get to Dean Babcock's question here about. He's got a couple questions, as everyone's concerned about the Boeing Starliner, and Dean Babcock opens up the can of worms, Gary, by saying, "How would the Apollo shuttle engineering teams have handled the Starliner problem?"
Well, first of all, we would have never launched it. Okay. It would have never even got to that point. We tested prior to it coming to Kennedy Space Center and during the development. North American Aviation at the time, with NASA at JSC, did an excellent job of going to the ground on every component in there. They continually tested to make sure that was a very good, fine product. And when we got it here at Kennedy, it was 99% complete project for us. Now, we had some problems putting, especially on Apollo 8, doing some work because the materials and what they gave us and what they machined was not compatible. We spent months trying to get it straightened out. But basically, between JSC and Rockwell, it's called Rockwell now, they did an excellent job. I'm embarrassed because I'm a McDonald guy because my dad worked for it, my mom worked for him, my brother worked for him, and family. And they built the Mercury and the Gemini spacecraft. And so I was so disappointed that they didn't get the Apollo, but now I'm really glad that they did.
Well, speaking of people who are embarrassed, it's the Boeing engineers just taking a hit left and right in social media. We got so we'll get to your other questions here here in a minute, but one, you wouldn't have launched it. It did have a helium leak when it was on the pad. They knew that. And we were talking with Bruce Jacobs or whoever we were talking with. Helium is, I know we were talking with the helium is the smallest atom.
It's the smallest particle, and our experience in the Apollo program actually had to do with the side hatch. The side hatch had two bottles that were used. We punctured one, and that pressure in that bottle opened the hatch because the hatch weighed 390 pounds.
Okay.
And it's got to go out and up, kind of uphill if you're looking at it. So they used these bottles. They had helium in it, and we'd have to go out and do what we call a mass spectrometer to sniff it to see what the leakage rate was. And we had a difficult time because of the helium models are so small, they would sneak past the O-ring seal. And this all it took, we had a spec, I don't remember what the actual spec was, but it was always over what the leakage allowable was. And so we would have to spend time changing those bottles out, changing the seals out on quite a few of the launches because of that thing. We always said, why don't you use something else, nitrogen or something else instead of helium? But that's what they did in the Apollo program.
So what you read up on this? What's the situation up there with Starliner? What do you think? To tell us, is the spacecraft worthy to come back to Earth? You think?
Well, as the latest I read this morning, no. First of all, they finally established why they were leaking. It's the seals themselves have broke down over time. I think there's got some Teflon in them, and they broke down. So that's what they now recognize that, and they can cure that. They can fix that if they ever fly again. The engines, I'm not familiar with that. They've got them all, I think, up and running except for one. But now, what I've just read this morning, it's just preliminary looking at it, is that there was some thought about kicking it off, letting it come back to Earth with nobody in it, and they would come back up with a Dragon to bring the crew back. Well, now they just find out that they cannot land with nobody in it. It's not capable.
They can't operate the Starliner without a pilot.
It's without a pilot, so they have to have somebody in there. So they're in a kind of a box right now. I don't know how they're going to get out of. Under emergency, we can use it, but right now they can't undock it and unmanned. Supposedly.
What do you think are some of the unknowns if they would try to come back with the crew?
Well, if I was the crew, the first thing I would be worrying about is those chutes. If this doesn't work, and you tell me this works,
Parachutes.
the parachutes, are they going to work? I would question that now, because they originally had a time they had problems with the parachutes. One of them, I think, on one of the things they didn't open. One of them didn't open, so they have that concern now. And then they got just airbags that it lands on, and the question is, well, will they work? What system did it? So, of course, I'm not familiar with any of that stuff, but that's the questions I would have if I was an astronaut.
Well, this is Calypso. It has been to space before. I understand the one they used on the uncrewed test, which they did land uncrewed, was a different capsule than this. I thought this was the third trip to space for Calypso, but well, how big of an if do you think that is, that this program won't be scrapped by Boeing?
The betting is right now it's a pretty strong if, or not an if, that Boeing is going to cancel the program, because it's a fixed price contract. No, it's not a fixed price. It's the other one. It's a bid plus. It's a fixed price. Excuse me, because they're losing money big time. They paid. NASA gave them the money to build it, and now they're way, way over budget by billions of dollars, and that comes out of the profits of Boeing. So they eventually have to either get it fixed where we can fly it, and then this space station has got a limited life now. Within the 30s, they're going to just deorbit it, and so they're looking maybe if we fixed everything, maybe 1 or 2 flights with the Starliner.
Yeah, you're looking at maybe 10 years if we're lucky for the space station to be up there until 2034.
Yeah.
In reality,
I hate to see that, but that's.
Well, I do talk to some anonymous people here on the Space Coast that don't want to be named, and a couple of them are involved with the safety of the space station. And there's some problems with the seals on the original Russian modules, the Zvezda and Zarya, that they're a little worried about. And those models are in the middle of this thing here.
Yeah, they were put way up. They've been there a long time. They were the first things that went up.
Yeah.
And so
there's a few models that are wore out, but there are a couple new models up there that, like the Japanese module, maybe Kibo could be taken off and used on another configuration. Maybe I hope they get creative like that with the Gary.
Radiation has a lot of effect on the rubber. It hardens it, and over time, and so actually
hardens rubber radiation.
When I was in high school, I had an instructor that worked on the atomic bomber. They were actually going to fly a bomber based using atomic energy to fuel it. And the problem they ended up with is because of the radiation, it would harden all the rubber in the aircraft, and it would also damage all the wiring. And to protect it with lead, made it so heavy that they couldn't fly the thing off the ground anyway.
Right.
But they did
lead balloon. Everyone heard of a lead balloon?
Yeah, they really did consider building a bomber that was used atomic energy.
Damn. Huh.
This was back in the 60s.
Well, we got a couple other questions here. Well, let's what's your final say on this Starliner thing? How do you think this is going to play out?
Well, I told you, it's not going to go anywhere. It's if they get it back, that'll probably be it. That's my speculation that it's a done deal. It's not. Boeing has lost its way, unfortunately. It started with the 737 with the software on that, and that was the issue they had with the first one that Starliner that they launched. It almost crashed into the space station. It was put in the wrong orbit. And I don't know what's happening with their software individual people that are doing it. I went through we went through that with NASA at the very end, where they wanted to come up with an all-new launch processing system. It did away with the LLPS that we had for the shuttle, and update it to all fancy, screens and all the new computer stuff. And they screwed that up so bad. They spent a year and I don't know how many millions of dollars telling each entity, you developed your software and we'll put it all together at the end. And one of the guys in our office was monitoring all that, and he kept coming back and said, it's not going to work. And sure enough, when they finally put it all together, nothing could talk to each other. They couldn't, they would have never have launched, so they just scrapped it. And that's just, they just didn't pay attention to the details like we did in the Apollo program. We didn't have a single point, so this is what we're going to do, go make it happen. Make sure everybody is on the same page.
We say some things off camera that we wouldn't say on air, critical ways, because some things we know and some things we don't. But you really do perceive this management problem as the culture has changed. It's a generational culture. Okay, let's face it, the young engineers today, a lot of them didn't keep score when they were playing kids' games and stuff like that.
They would not have. An engineer today, if I put him back in the Apollo program, would go home crying to his mommy.
Okay, like I said, that's a
you don't know the pressure we were under. If you screwed up, you got yelled at.
Oh yeah.
And if you couldn't take that yelling at you, it says you need to get on the ball and give me the right answer, then you were gone. And
well, that's the way Rocco Petrone operated.
Oh gosh,
These
yes.
great leaders, you didn't BS them, because they knew what was at stake: human lives and more importantly, American integrity too. Let's put in there.
They had the goal, and Rocco Petrone, they really don't put enough emphasis on what he did for this program. He was a very stern leader. And he expected all of us NASA engineers to know exactly everything that our contractor engineers, if not more. And if you asked that engineer of your contractor a question and later on saw you in the hall and asked you that same question, you better come up with the same answer that guy came. So we were driven to not just sit back on our heels and put our feet up on the desk and play cards. We were there to work hard and to know exactly what everything was going on, if not more. And we had engineers that knew more than the contractors.
Wow. How about a lot of the old timers say, Gary, that there's too much risk assessment and not enough risk taking?
Risk taking. I don't think we did. I would consider we didn't do a lot of risk taking, really. We documented everything that we did, and we didn't move beyond a certain. If it didn't work, we didn't move on and say we'll come back to that later. We either fixed it, or we had to have it fixed by a certain time. So we never left anything unknown. The paperwork system was hard. I mean, I didn't like it. It's very complex, but it had a function, and as a function was probably one of the single point things that's made us successful because of the way we documented every single thing that we did.
So why didn't we just stack all that paper up and just walk to the moon?
We had enough to do it.
Yeah, everybody says we did, didn't we?
But people don't realize for an Apollo launch, all this paperwork that's been developed from the day it arrived here at Kennedy Space Center and the day it's going to get ready to launch, we take all that paperwork and we go into a room in the ONC building, we set it down, and then they have this big crowd of JSC subsystem managers, and we have a big crowd of the contractor come down. They open up every single document and they review it. And then what they do, we're up in our offices, we're sitting there waiting for the phone call to come. And we'll get a phone call that says, would you come down here and explain to us what you did? And we would go down and we would explain it to them, and they could say, well, we agreed with what you did. We just didn't like the way you wrote it, but we would agree. Or they'd say, we don't like what you did it wrong, go back and redo it. So all that was done before we even launched, every piece of paper that was reviewed. And then the crew, the lead engineers were required in the Apollo program. They would come by and get the lead engineers, take them to a room, and there was a wall of glass. On this side was the astronauts, and you were sat on this side. Astronauts were already keyed what to ask you, and they would ask you about your system and the problems you had, and you had to answer to the crew.
Wow. That's so it sounds like a little helium leak would have never made it to the pad.
No, this was at the pad.
Oh, okay.
We were just, we didn't launch without, it had to be back in spec before we launched it.
Let's get to a couple other questions here. Before we move on to a couple Gary's comments about the two great Apollo missions, actually 3 counting ASTP in July. KG was asking, is it too cost prohibitive to create a Mars vehicle with artificial gravity?
I don't know.
Okay.
That's beyond my deal. You would think that they, if it's big enough and they put it in a roll, you can eventually get enough G-forces out at the end that you could just stand up and walk around, like we did on the Skylab.
Yeah, and maybe that'll come to fruition.
Yeah.
You got a whole bunch of structural engineering in there. My phone just went dead. So I see that there's a question from Carlton Bailey saying, if they landed the test Boeing Starliner without a crew, how come this one can't?
I don't know what they haven't given us enough information yet, so I don't know why they have to have a crew. It doesn't make sense. Again, it's a software issue somewhere in there that they finally found out. They really didn't run it to ground. It sounds like that's what we call running the ground, as you test every possible aspects of that software, looking for sneak circuits. Your wiring diagrams are very important that you have. Integration diagrams are very important, where you have 2 different interfaces. You want to make sure that the wiring on this side matches the wiring on that side, and that happened to us on the shuttle, and we almost lost the shuttle because of that. It's not publicized, but I'll get to that someday, about how we really almost came losing a shuttle because
the Gamma Ray Observatory flight of Eileen Collins, where a bolt rubbed the
this is they were flying an IUS on a payload. I think it was I don't have it off the top of my head, but anyway, they have they call a super zip, which is what cuts the IUS itself away from the cradle that it's sitting in. It sits laying down, and when they get in orbit, they rotate it up to about a 45 degree. Then they fire this ordnance ring, and it cuts this metal, and then there's 4 big thrusters, spring thrusters, that pushes it out of the orbiter bay. Well, there's an A system and a B system of ordnance. There's an A train and a B train. So if the A doesn't fire, you fire the B. If the B doesn't fire, vice versa. Well, to cut corners, the payload people did this a lot to us, is that their customers say it costs too much to fly on a shuttle. How can we get it cheaper? So somewhere in the chain, they decided to do away with this integration diagram. And so what they ended up having was, when you fired A, it fired both A and B. So we had too much powder in the chamber. And so that ring totally blew apart, and pieces, it made shrapnel. Some of the pieces were 3 feet long, some are this long.
Yeah.
And it penetrated the wire trays, penetrated the aft bulkhead, penetrated the blankets. And if there's trays that makes some metal going in there, luckily didn't go deep enough to cut into the wiring. If it cut into the wiring between the forward fuselage and the aft fuselage, we'd have been in trouble.
Wow, I remember us talking about that. We will put a program together on that. Yeah. That was a big faux pas.
It was a faux pas. And also in the testing, how they tested it was wrong. The testing should have caught it, but they didn't do it. They didn't do a good job,
Well,
unfortunately.
I've been talking to Gary here for a little while. I know that Carlton Bailey, we asked your question. Cliff Watson, good morning to you in Pomona, Australia. He's in Wednesday morning having breakfast there, Gary.
Okay.
He says concerning Boeing, looks like heads will roll.
I doubt it.
You doubt it?
Yeah.
Well, there's a drama that's being played out. There's really creating a backup. Crew 8 Dragon was supposed to be launched in next week, I believe. Even they have to have the port empty where the Starliner is for another Crew Dragon to dock.
Yeah.
There's 3 docking ports for the crew, I believe.
But only 2 can use with the Starliner.
Yeah.
One's for the Russians, and the other 2 is for us.
Yep, and so it's ironic that the photo we were showing you of Starliner is taken from the windows of the Crew Dragon, looking down on it, on there. Of course, the Crew Dragon can have 6 people, maybe even 8, but 6 probably comfortably in it. But they wouldn't be able to. There's no couches for them. If they wanted to come back with the crew that's up there right now.
Yeah, they don't have the suits.
And they don't have the right
The
suit.
right suits are not. Yes.
They couldn't go in
They're
a
not.
Boeing suit.
I don't think unless they give them some. I don't know if they've had any extra suits up there, but the.
So maybe this Cygnus has got
They didn't say
some
suits in it.
SpaceX suits on them there just for.
It may not. I don't know what's inside that thing.
Of course, Suni and Butch have never maybe put on a SpaceX suit. I'm sure they have to be tailored a little bit.
Some
to
of them
their
I think are tailor made to it, but I'm not real familiar. But
something else to consider.
yeah, there's a lot. Yeah, it's a lot more complex than for us little Earthlings that are not associated with it to understand everything that has to go on to get this people back safely.
Meanwhile, they've been up there for, what did I say, 80 days now. They were going to be up there for 8, and they've been up there for over 2 months.
Yeah.
So, question on our UCX family microphone there, Logan.
Dean Babcock says, do you think the Russian N-1 rocket concept would have been successful with more test flights?
Sergei Korolev stated he ordered to have manufactured 14 N-1 rockets. That was his deal. And he has told his people that number 13 and 14 would be the only 2 that ever would land on the moon with a man on board. Their philosophy was what Elon Musk did is you launch them, you're going to blow them up, you learn what happened, and you improve that. You launch it again, it blows up, and you just keep doing this. And he figured that the 13th one would be the first one that actually wouldn't blow up.
A parallel to that, Dean Babcock, to your excellent question, like you said, Elon Musk, is this the 5th Starship that he's going to launch? I think it's the 5th one, or has he done 4 already? I'm losing track.
I've lost track too.
He's got, like you said, the same philosophy.
Yeah.
I got the money. I'm going to keep pushing the envelope on each one.
Yeah.
He actually, this one going up, he wants the big booster to be caught in the tongs.
in the tongs. That's
They're calling
what
them chopsticks, I think,
Yeah.
on the pad.
And the von Braun wanted that same approach, but I forget the NASA administrator, somebody in NASA says, no, you're going to launch it all at one time. And that's
Bob Miller.
Mueller,
M-U-E-L-L-E-R. He
was the one that told him, and
all ups.
von Braun said, no, we're going to do it this way. And he said, no, you're going to go ahead, and the first time you launch a Saturn V on Apollo 4, it'll be all up at one time, because they wanted to do it in stages. And he said, at the rate that you're going, we'll never meet Kennedy's commitment of before the end of the decade. So that
Meaning
forced
the first stage with 2 dummy second and third
Yeah.
stages, then the second and third stage being active with
Yeah.
the dummy third.
Yeah,
and then,
that's how he wanted to do it. So it was the right philosophy. He says, I was lucky. If it had gone wrong on that first launch of Apollo 4, then I'd look pretty bad.
yeah. We'll go back, and Gary's Apollo 6 is a great lessons learned too, that they did take some risk on doing that.
You know, we didn't consider it as a risk to launch Apollo 8.
Okay.
They were very confident in the fixes. They were pretty simple, basically, overall. And so it was a go.
Well, Apollo 6 I allude to that you shared is one, the pogo effect, and then the third stage didn't ignite for the translunar injection.
And
that
then
they
it blew
wanted
up
to do.
in orbit.
Yeah, it blew up in orbit. So, they
'cause
still
couldn't-
put the
couldn't-
next
They
one.
couldn't vent it, and the slaw had a panel come off of it, and so there was a lot of fixes that we could do, and we were able to do it. We were fast on our feet. We didn't have to go to a lot of meetings to talk about how we're going to do this. We were given an order, and that was how Musk does it. You got an order, I want you to do this, and you go do it, and tell me what happens if you can't.
Well, we talked about an hour with you already. I'm not going to belabor the Apollo era there, but I'm putting up some nice graphics here of Tom Usiak's Apollo 15 going to the moon. He was 19 years old there. Give me those names there, Logan. Logan, our intern from Eastern Florida State College. Marty's on vacation. Covered everybody here. We're glad that
quite a few.
Kay Gee's a new lady to join us here. We appreciate
Welcome,
that.
Kay.
Welcome. And Tommy Usiak joined us with his brother Mark. And I bragged about them over the weekend. They are written up in Quest magazine.
Oh, really?
Which is a definitive journal on space history that you want to check out. What's your thoughts on you have a story about Apollo 11 as we look at Chris Callie's montage of the Gemini to shuttle era there up to Artemis.
Well, truthfully, I was scheduled to work Apollo 11, and I requested, it was kind of a dual thing, not to work on that one. So I did not work on it.
Okay.
The gentleman that I would work with, didn't particularly care for to work with, and so I didn't want to go through that emotion of having to put up with what he did, and so we had the other new intern in the office work with him, and I didn't. It's in the long run, it really did work out for my career a lot better.
Excellent. Apollo 15, one of the boldest missions of the J missions I love.
Apollo 15 was one of my favorites. One, because I actually got to experience of launching off the moon.
Okay.
All of us engineers, we had our in between we had the O&C building, and to the east of us was the flight crew training building, which you're familiar with, and in there we had the flight simulators, and all of us engineers wanted to, because this is before all the gaming we have on our phones and laptops, is we all wanted to go over there and experience getting into the command module and doing a docking or flying around in space. And so nobody ever got to go. And then I met a gentleman through motorcycling that worked in the headquarters building that had connections to somebody over in that flight crew training. I told him I had a desire to do this, and it went a couple of years before he finally called me up one day. He says, "Gary," he said, "I'm going to take you over to the ONC, over to the flight crew training building, and we're going to go in a simulator." So I said, "Oh, this is great." So walked across there expecting to be in the command module simulator, because that's what I worked on. But instead, they put me in the lunar module. And so you'll go through a door, and there you're exactly like you're in a lunar module in the ascent stage. So we're sitting there. It was the gentleman that took me over, and then whoever's running the test. First thing they asked, I said, "Do you get motion sickness?" "No, sir, I do not." "Are you about loud noises? Do they affect you?" I said, "No." I said, "Okay." So turned on the program. I'm looking out at the moonscape, and he hits the go button, and we took off. And even though we're sitting there, the vibration and the sound, and then as it came up, they do a pitch over, and we was 15. You look at, there's that rill. It was down as like a Grand Canyon. We flew right over that, and you're just looking out the window, and that pitched over, you grabbed, because you really felt like you were going over. And as soon as we cleared it, that was the end of the program. But I did get to launch off the
That's
moon.
good. Well, winner for our friend Bob Pearson was the trainer that took you.
Yeah, I
in
don't
there,
know if
Bob?
that was him. I wouldn't recognize who the person was, but that was a thrill.
Well, I'm glad you got to do that. We've heard a lot about the FLTB and what
Yeah,
a mecca it was for celebrities, and all kinds
yeah,
of dignitaries would fly that. And Bob Pearson called it the uh, the best video game in the world at the time. There's nothing ever like it, and I didn't know it had a lot of sound and movement to it. In
yeah.
in there. So, well, we've enjoyed having Gary here. Let's end with a couple fun images here. What a classic image to celebrate our July that's passed of two Apollo missions on the line. This is the classic picture that Buzz Aldrin is saluting with his right hand on there. And you know, Gary, every picture's got 1,000 words, and sometimes every picture has some hidden meaning to it.
Yeah.
And this, of course, is a 55-year-old photograph that 5 or 6 years ago, with the high-tech scanning that was going on, somebody got a hold of the original scans or pictures of the Apollo 11 and found out that in the helmet there is Buzz Aldrin is looking back at Neil, taking the picture in there. And a lot of us think that that head would swivel around, you know, but no, that head that doesn't swivel at all.
No.
And they're looking like they're inside of a fishbowl, looking around inside there. And there's Buzz Aldrin, enhanced by a super duper computer imaging technique there to show you that in this classic photo, he's actually turning around and looking at Neil taking the photo
And that
there.
means we did not fake the moon landing, just because you see that.
That's right. That's right.
Forget-
There you go.
Don't
And
start
Gary
that.
and I's got some. We're gonna do a moon hoax program and bust our numbers open on YouTube here. Like we wish more people would be watching us always, but we know we're grateful for you watching today. And if you hadn't, there's Buzz looking at Neil. So cool when they revealed that. And wish Winston Scott a birthday on our Facebook page today. Gary, just great having you in the house as usual. And I know that everybody appreciated what you shared today. He called me this morning that he was here, and I immediately thought, I don't have much of a program together today. Unless we'd go to the shuttles of the month of August, that there's 9 beautiful ones in there. So thanks a lot, my friend.
You're welcome.
Anything you'd like to share with us about parting shots about Boeing or anything?
No, I just wish them the best of luck. It was a very wonderful company. It has a lot of proud history. Uh, they've done a lot of great things. It's sad to see how it has kind of gone downhill a little bit, but so has NASA. It's just the times of this of it now, in the culture that we're starting to try to live in, and so I think that has a lot of effect on it. I saw that in my later years. In fact, that's one of the reasons why I really retired, because I saw where we were headed, and I particularly didn't care for that. It wasn't my style that I grew up in. My dad always told me, he says, when you start a company, when you start your career, he says, over time, you'll find out that the company changes so much that you really don't recognize it. And he says, that's the time for you to bail. He retired at 55, and I said, I'm going to do that too. And 55 was the right time for me to leave. I hated, in a way, I hated it, but the job at the time was not what I started out with.
Mm-hmm.
And I just didn't want to waste my time.
I think what you're saying is some of these legacy companies of the space age that got us there are not being run like their forefathers
If they even
wanted them
exist
to be,
today.
even if they exist today.
There's a lot of technology companies that I grew up with that were prevalent, and they're no longer there. They either got bought up or they just went out of business.
Well, we'll have Gary back on more as we see fit here at the American Space Museum. And if you're ever here when he's doing a docent tour, you're going to get a great knowledge whipped on you there. So, Gary, thank you again for being here, and particularly at the last minute, my friend. You're always very interesting what he has to say, and we hope that you all enjoyed this from a national treasure, Gary Allgire, and his expertise. So, and Google Gary's name there. Put Gary's name up there again so people know how to spell Allgire. Google that on our archives there, and you're going to love the Apollo 1. And the Buran is also very interesting program that you did there. And we're going to work up some more programs with Gary here down the road.
And we're going to do Apollo 13 like you never saw it before.
Yeah, Apollo 13 like you never saw.
I heard.
We can't wait for that. And tomorrow, we're going to have a very interesting guest. Mike Mungo is going to be with us here. Mike is quite an influencer. He's involved with a lot of kids' education and getting kids
Cool.
interested in space and he actually thinks that we need to send children to space.
Oh,
Uh,
that would be interesting.
yeah, so
I don't
so
know
you'll
about the-
stay curious with Mike Mungo tomorrow,
Yeah, I don't know
Gary.
about the parents, but the kids would love it.
That's right. So thank you, Logan, for doing a great job today on our Streamlabs production. And thank you all for watching. We really appreciate it. We'll just mention that Karen Conklin is at home recuperating from another radiation treatment. And we wish her the best as anybody knows, battling cancer is nothing simple or easy to go through. So she needs a lot of prayers, and we're thinking of her family and her husband, Mark, all the time.
If you're watching, Karen.
That's right. So until next time, till tomorrow when we got Mike Mungo, you're not going to forget him after you see him. Can't wait for this influencer, Mike Mungo, on our show tomorrow. And until then, I'm Mark Marquette saying I can't wait to see you in our museum to bridge the space between us.